For those of you who are new to classical academic press, maybe even new to classical education, we're so blessed to have you. We're excited to have you. And for those that are hearing Chris for maybe the second or fifth or 10th time, we welcome you as well. And we're blessed by your presence and your continual efforts to renew, restore classical education and teach it, whether in your home, your brick and mortar school, in your co-op. So we thank you all for joining us today. Dr. Christopher Perrin is an author, consultant, and speaker who specializes in classical education. Chris co-founded and serves full-time as the CEO and publisher of Classical Academic Press. Chris is also a consultant to charter, public, private, and Christian schools across the country. Chris received his BA in history from the University of South Carolina and his MDiv and PhD in apologetics from Westminster Theological Seminary. He's taught at Messiah College and Chesapeake Theological Seminary, and served as the founding headmaster of a classical school right here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for 10 years. Chris is the author of The Greek Alphabet Codecracker, Greek for Children, and of course, as many of you are probably familiar, he is the co-author of the Latin for Children series, and those have all been published by Classical Academic Press. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome our speaker for today, Dr. Christopher Perrin. Chris, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. It is such a pleasure to see all of your names and to see where some of you are hailing from, including Melbourne, Australia. Terrence from Melbourne. It's great to have some international folks on this call. I could say buongiorno for those of you who know Italian, and buenos dias for those of you who know some Spanish, and bonjour if you know French. You know, those phrases are really Latin, aren't they? Why? Why is it that 90% of the vocabulary of, say, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian come from Latin? Well, already we're talking about history, aren't we? One of the things that's so wonderful about studying Latin is that when you study Latin, you are doing multiple things at once. Let me just switch I'm going to change the view. You know, I'm looking at this massive monitor and all I'm seeing is myself. It's like I'm speaking into a mirror. Has that happened to you? And it can sometimes be a little distracting. So I want to figure out how to turn off myself. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm just going to, much better. There, now I'm gone. It's because the reason that these Romance languages are filled with Latin is because of a historical circumstance, and that's because, well, the Romans won. The Romans conquered so much of the lands around the Mediterranean Sea that they had them all speak Latin. And we could, of course, have some interesting discourse about what it means for the Romans to have conquered and who they were, what was good and bad about them, etc. But they had a tremendous influence globally. So, you know, when they conquered Gaul, which is modern day France, they had all of those Gauls speak Latin, and the Gaulish language merged with Latin to become, well, French. And of course, the Romans conquered Hispania. And when they conquered Hispania, everybody spoke Latin, and the native language merged with Latin and became what we now call Spanish. The same is true for Portuguese, and of course, you know, the Romans, they spread forth from Latium in central Italy. So these Latin people had everybody on the Italian peninsula speak Latin. That eventually became what we now call Italian. And how is it that we can make the claim that if you speak English, like I'm speaking right now, that every other word I speak has a Latinate source? How did that happen? Well, it's because, well, first of all, early centuries after Christ, the Romans did attack Rome, did attack Britannia, and of course Latin came that way. But then when William the Conqueror from Normandy came from France into England in 1088, he had everybody speak French, and a lot of the Latin from French came into the English language. And so English is this interesting amalgam of source languages that preceded it, including Anglo-Saxon, uh, 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 French, Latin earlier on, all merging to the Teutonic sources as well, becoming what we now call English. Well, the Angles are in there too. The Jutes, the Angles, the Saxons, all folks who had inhabited Britannia or England. So English is already just to do an etymological or linguistic study of our English languages is taking us into history. And I just note that for a moment to say that to study Latin is already to take us into a historical study, a study of our own linguistic genealogy. And as we do that, I observe that it is at least this: it's pleasurable. It is a pleasure and a blessing to know who you are and from where you have come. Just as you do your own genealogical studies to know something about who, if you're an American, when did your family end up in the United States? Where did they come from? Maybe you have done that study and you can go back 5, 6, 7 or more generations and you can talk about who your great, great, great grandfather was. And if you look at photographs, and we don't have photographs going back that far, but you sometimes you see, for example, when you see a photograph of a grandmother or a great grandmother and realize that your great grandmother looks a lot like your daughter. In other words, these genealogical traits are passed through generations sometimes. Do you know who you are? Do you want to know who you are? Do you want to know from where you have come? Do you want to know history? Do you want to know why your tongue moves the way it does? So if 50% of the English words we speak come from the Romans, guess what? About 80 to 90% of the technical vocabularies that we use, say in science, in philosophy, music, law, come from Latin. Why would it be? Well, it's another historical question. It's because the Romans won. And it's because all of the professional vocabularies in, say, ministry, medicine, law, uh, uh, um, the, 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 the art, music, philosophy, theology, all of these professional vocabularies came from Latin. All of those disciplines were created in an environment that was, well, Latin. And why was that? Well, it's because even as we move past the age of the Roman Empire and we move into, say, medieval Christendom, there were a lot of nations with a lot of tongues speaking different languages. But when you came together to study or to do anything, what language would be the chosen language? Well, it would be Latin. So the first universities, people from various places around the world would come, but if they were all going to speak and understand one another, they would choose Latin as the language. And so even through medieval Christendom into the Renaissance and the Reformation and the Enlightenment period, Latin is called the lingua franca. Isn't that ironic? Shouldn't it be lingua latina? Well, it just means the language of diplomacy, the language that everyone would need to speak in order to do business and education and commerce across many nations. So again, we're looking at history, and I just pause to observe and say, I find that pleasurable, even if it doesn't help me to earn more money or get a new job. Isn't it just good to know who you are and from where you've come? It turns out that Latin is the linguistic DNA of the West, and that includes the United States, North America, South America. It's who we are, it turns out. And so if you know Latin really well, now we could turn beyond, move away from pleasure for a moment and personal edification and perhaps move into the professional area, and let's just say you think you might want to go to law school to become a lawyer. And if you've known some Latin, you'll find out that, well, all of the legal vocabulary is Latinate. You know some of these phrases like stare decisis or habeas corpus. You may have the body. All of these Latin maxims, phrases. Well, they're all malum in se. Some of you know these. Some of you are attorneys, perhaps on this call. Well, if you know some Latin, the legal vocabulary comes well all the more quickly. It's almost as if to know Latin is like to have a silver key around your neck. And I'm not saying being fluent in Latin at the highest scholarly level, even to be just basically familiar and conversant with Latin, is like having a silver key around your neck. Because someday you'll be standing in front of a door that you would like to open. And if you know Latin, you'll find that key will help you to open that door. That would be, say, the door to law school. It might be the door to a job in Italy. It might be a door that says art historian or minister, or it might be a door that says physical therapist. It just turns out that virtually every significant discipline in our civilization, well, it's based in the Latin vocabulary. You go into the military. Well, the word military comes from miles, which means soldier, who could walk a mile, 1,000 steps, the old Roman mile. Miles, we get the word mile from it, but a miles is a soldier, and those who have, their profession of being a soldier are part of the military, and on it goes with Latin. In fact, one of the other pleasures of Latin is that it gives you a kind of X-ray vision to see through words. I often will be in a room when I'm talking about this, about Latin, and there were almost inevitably over some door, there is this Latin word, a verb, spelled E-X-I-T. And E-X-I-T is from the verb exire, which in Latin means to go out. In fact, io means I go. Ex-io or ex-ire means I go out or to go out. That ex is a preposition, which means out or out of. And with ire, which means to go, well, ex-ire means to go out. And exit, well, that's third person singular, that T ending. It's third person singular present indicative. It means he, she, or it goes out. And so when I see the word exit over a door, I see that. And I see other words start to talk to one another when I see Latin. You can hear the conversations that are going on, as it were, underneath the surface of the English words that you're reading, because their mothers and fathers are all Latin words. And I find that pleasurable, but it also helps to think. It helps to give another layer of understanding often, right? So it's not uncommon for us to learn an English word that's Latin, and we learn its meaning. I just glance down here at my screen and I see the word history, and history in this case it's a Greek word, but historia in Greek, from Greek, means investigation. And Herodotus, being one of the first historians, he called the father of history. He engaged in historia, but history is an inquiry, trying to understand the causes of things. And if you know the Greek word, you don't just think of history at a first level kind of meaning or way. You hear the layers are beneath it and behind it, and that's, it's pleasurable, and it also aids understanding, and it aids expression. Just another pleasure. I like to say to kids, you do acquire a kind of X-ray vision. Once there was a third or fourth grader who was taking Latin, and he was at church, and he heard the pastor make a comment about how lovely the prelude was. And the pastor kind of was musing. He said, "Prelude. I wonder where that word comes from." And this fourth grader thought to himself, well, pre means before, from pry, before, and lude. I wonder if that's from ludus, which can mean play, game, or even school. We get the word, by the way, ludicrous, from ludus, as if it's just child's play, but ludus was the noun, which meant the school that young children would go to, but it could also mean play and game. And of course, that's what a lot of education is when kids are young. It's playful learning, right? So ludus becomes a pretty good word for school. But prelude, this fourth grader was asking himself, why prelude? Well, he thought pray means before, ludus play. It's it's a kind of playing before. And well, he was right. What when an orchestra is doing a prelude, it literally means they're kind of warming up. They're they're playing their instruments before the main event. So the student who knew some Latin could pretty much discern what the word meant, even though he had never encountered it before in his life. It reminds me once when my daughter, who had been taking Latin for 3 or 4 years in upper elementary school, was, tagging along with me, going to one of the big bookstores. I think it was one of the Borders stores that is now closed, and she was walking through the language section, and she picked out an Italian book. And why would you even pull an Italian? She was probably 13 or so. Why would she even pull an Italian book off the shelf? Well, because of her education. Why was she even in the language section? Well, I guess she might have been there because I was, but I can't remember. But it might have been because she liked language, because she was studying a foreign language in addition to English. But she pulled out that Italian book and she opened it up and she started reading through the first chapter or two, and she said, Daddy, I already know these Italian words. Well, why? Because 90% of the words in Italian come from Latin, directly from Latin. For example, amicus in Latin means friend. Well, what does it mean in Italian? Well, amici. And what does it mean what is friend in Spanish? Amigo, right? So amicus is just kind of, it's changed a little bit, but she could recognize it. And she saw that was the case with virtually every vocabulary word, except it had an O or an A after it, like the Italians are prone to do. And then she started to read the grammar section, and she said, Daddy, I already know this grammar. Because when you learn the way the Latin language works, it's regular and orderly, and there's great designations for how words work in Latin. We have words like prepositions. The word preposition, by the way, means placed before. It's preposition, position from it's Latin. In fact, the word grammar just means letters, although it's Greek that came into Latin. Well, she knew the grammar already because she had learned it in Latin. And when you learn the grammar of Latin, you're really learning the grammar of all of the Romance languages. In fact, to some degree, all languages, all at once. It's an inflected language, which means that even nouns have endings so that we can determine whether they're functioning as, say, a subject or an object. And this means that the word order in Latin can move around. You can put words in virtually any order and still derive the same meaning. And it makes you think differently about the grammar, but you're thinking in a fresh way about the grammar. Let me give you an example. If I said, the cat sat on the mat, well, the word order is pretty important. But if I say the mat sat on the cat, identical words, it doesn't make sense. But in Latin, the endings of the words will tell you what is the subject, what is the object, and other things as well. So it's great to study an inflected language like Latin just to get a fresh understanding of how grammar works in our own tongue. In fact, if you study grammar in Latin, you're at the same time doing grammar in English, and in a fresh way that actually kind of turns on the lights of our own English grammar. You see, to study grammar in your own tongue that you've just been raised in, your native tongue, is tedious, generally speaking. You can make it fresh. There's a number of things you can do that can help. But it's kind of like, to exaggerate a little bit, it's like teaching your 10 or 12-year-old how to walk. Did you notice that your heel strikes first and that your arms are swinging out in a particular rhythm and way, following your feet, but in a diagonal relationship, hand to foot? Let's practice this, student, shall we? We're going to do this for 30 minutes. Heel first, left, right, extend your arms. What would your students say? What would your children say? I know how to walk. And they have learned how to speak English because they've observed your speaking English from the time they were infants. But to study Latin and Latin grammar is not that tedious. It's not studying something you already know. It's studying something that's foreign to you. It's a foreign language. And it makes you therefore have to crack the code of the language only by learning the grammar. The grammar is the code that helps you to derive meaning. And so you're studying the Latin grammar, you understand how language works, and it's immediately transferable to English. I'll give you an example. If I say to you, me go to the grocery store after this webinar, you would say, no, you don't say me go to the grocery store. You say, I go to the grocery store. Well, why can't I say me go to the grocery store? What's the grammatical principle or rule that would allow me to say me go to the grocery store? Didn't you understand what I said? And some of you would be able to tell me why. That's not appropriate. But some of you would just say, I know that's not right, but I just don't know why. So you don't know the grammar. You can't describe why you speak a certain way, but you just know how to imitate what you've heard and you hope it's correct. Well, there's a reason it's correct, and it's because me is in the objective case. It receives action. Give it to me, not give it to I. And I is in the subjective case. In Latin, we'd call that nominative. It does the action. It doesn't receive the action. So I give it to you, not me give it to you. And so if I'm performing the action, I would use the subjective case I. I go to the grocery store. I wouldn't use me because I use me only when I'm receiving the action. Give it to me. Well, we've made a grammatical distinction. And you can teach that to kids in English and they're like, okay, now I know why, but I already knew how to speak correctly. Why did I have to learn why that's correct? But when you're studying it in Latin, it becomes a code that you have to know in order to make sense of the language. And then without even knowing it, you're understanding the subjective and objective case in English too. It's kind of like when you travel to a foreign country. You know, I've been blessed to have the opportunity to go to Italy with this program that our company co-leads with Gordon College called the Orvieto program in Italy. We take teachers and students there for 2 weeks. I won't talk about that, even though I would love to. And so I've noticed that when I go to Italy, yes, I do learn some things about Italy, but I also learn some things about the United States. When you travel away and you put yourself in a new culture, and a new language is like a new culture, you discover something about your own native culture. For example, the relationship that we have to time here in the United States. It's different than the relationship that the Italians have to time. And all you have to do is go out to an Italian restaurant for dinner. And you'll discover that dinner generally will have 3 courses, sometimes 4, and it will last about 3 or 4 hours. And just try to make the Italian waiters speed up, because they won't. Okay, I learned something about the way we dine here in the United States by going to Italy. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm pointing out that the study of Latin brings these benefits. Now, some of these benefits might come to us by studying another language as well, like say German or a modern language, which brings to mind this question, is Latin a dead language? Well, no, it's not dead because it's been reborn in all of the Romance languages and it exists right now on my English tongue. There's something else about Latin that brings a great blessing and benefit. And it's that it's puzzle solving. It's a kind of, some of you like doing crossword puzzles, but you have to pay attention. You have to do translation in Latin and inflected language in particular, where the word order can be virtually anything. You have to puzzle things out and pay attention. And this develops over time a habit of attending to details. Whenever I translate a Latin sentence and read, I'm finding myself paying attention in ways that sometimes unusual for me, fresh. And I believe it's a transferable habit. that applies to a lot of things that we humans do when we have to pay careful attention. In fact, my wife's grandfather was a cancer researcher and had done some of the original research on chemotherapy. He's known as one of the four original developers of chemotherapy. His name's Charles Zubrod, and he was once asked by a journalist why he enjoyed studying Latin and Greek as a child, because he had mentioned that he really enjoyed studying Latin and Greek. Now, he was from a generation where they did that more routinely than we do now, and he said, um, because it's puzzle solving. And he said, um, I'm a cancer researcher, and I rather regard cancer as a puzzle to be solved, and that's what Latin and Greek training was like to me, puzzle solving. And it's led me and helped me in my career in medicine. You can imagine a lawyer having to pay very careful attention to his language in a brief or some such document. And you can imagine any kind of profession that requires careful care and attention being benefited from a habit of carefully attending. So it does that. But Latin does so many other things. Of course, it's preparing us for a language study in the Romance languages. Of course, it's illuminating our own understanding of English, so that our English is better and more accurate and more attentive to detail and precise meaning because of our study of Latin. Of course, our vocabulary grows in English when we study Latin, especially our technical vocabularies, in which 80 to 90% of technical vocabularies come from Latin. That's helpful. Yes, it's rather mundane to have to say it, but yes, it will help you in standardized tests like the SAT vocabulary test. That's probably the least important thing, but great, it has its place. And, yes, it's also going to help you when you study English literature from about 150 years ago or so, even less than that, 50, 75 years ago. If you want to read C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, for example, he will quote Latin phrases. And I don't think he translated them. I think the editors had to drop in the translation. But there are some great books in which the translations don't come. I'll cite for you the great German Reformed historian Philip Schaff, who wrote the 6-volume work on the history of the Christian church. He drops in Latin quotations and Greek left and right without translating them, because he expected his readers to know those languages. So if you want to read a great historian like that, already the study of Latin and Greek is going to help you even in your reading of English literature, history, philosophy, and theology. So there's these benefits, and I would say that there's a good chance that if you studied Latin and enjoyed it, you won't stop there. You'll go on to not just become bilingual, but to become multilingual. I'll cite it as an example my own study of Italian. I'm not a great Italian speaker. I can hear it and understand it much better than I can speak it, and they do speak. I would just say rapidamente. They speak quite quickly for me. But reading it has not been that hard of a challenge for me, because, well, I can take my time when I'm reading, and the vocabulary is so very similar. So one language like Latin is a great language to lead you yet to another language. It's a wonderful language to know. It was just considered to be a normal thing for people to study growing up. It's a language that people can learn when they're young and enjoy it if it's taught in the right way. Many of our students that we have here, that we know through our company, Classical Academic, report that Latin is their favorite discipline. Now, you can't teach Latin to, say, a 10-year-old the way you would to a college student. So we have Song School Latin, which is designed for young learners, even, say, first and second graders. And we use song to teach vocabulary. And we teach a lot of English derivatives from the Latin. And it's not a core curriculum at first and second grade, but students can happily learn Let's say 200 or so Latin, high frequency Latin words a year in first grade and second grade, and enjoy it and enjoy seeing all the English words that come from the Latin words that they're learning. They learn porto, portare, I carry, to carry. And then you let them know that, well, we get the word, well, portable from that word, and also porter. And even there's this French word portage when you carry your canoe around rocks when you're in a river. Oh, and by the way, if you transport or import or export, now you can teach them those prepositions. Trans means across, in means in, ex means out, export means to carry out of, import means to carry in, report means to carry again. You know, airport. Oh, how about port itself? The ship pulled into a port. Well, 7, 8, 9, 10 English words derived from one or two Latin words. Do these first and second graders like that? The answer is yes, they do, because they like having powers. They like having X-ray vision. And that's how we teach it, with a lot of song. And they seem to really enjoy it. But then when you get to upper elementary school, we have a curriculum, and there are other good ones, by the way, but we have a curriculum called Latin for Children, and we teach it narratively. We have a story, start with a Roman story, moves Marcus and Julia, go on some adventures, but we're teaching students grammar now, not just vocabulary and derivatives, but we're teaching them how the language works so they can actually translate, starting with simple sentences. And we have a 3-level curriculum through Latin for Children, Primer A, B, and C. And then we have a high school curriculum called Latin Alive, which is designed for junior high and high school students who can learn quicker and faster. So there's the advertisement. If you're interested in Latin and you haven't studied it yourself before, and you have some students who might be interested, well, go to our website and download the sample chapters that you can look at for free and just see if it's a good fit. And if ours isn't a good fit, go to another Latin curriculum, but learn Latin. It will bless you. It will become a friend to you. It will introduce you to good friends who you can know in their tongue. And that's where I'd like to stop and then take your questions. When you begin to learn Latin so that you can read, say, the Bible, the Vulgate in the original, and I read pretty much regularly out of the Vulgate. That's one way I can kind of keep my Latin fresh, is just to read the scriptures in Latin. I have to read it more slowly than I do English. I have to be more attentive, and it helps me in some other ways apart from English to attend and see things in scripture that I wouldn't otherwise see just by reading it in another language. But to read Augustine in Latin, and I can't read Augustine just straight through. I can't even read it as fast as I can read the Latin Vulgate. But to read Augustine and hear him in his own words, to process Augustine's thoughts, say in his book, The Confessions, using the same language that he used, is to create a kind of connection and camaraderie and fellowship with Augustine that's hard to put into words. But there is something, not everything, maybe not even the most important thing, but there is something lost in translation. To know a writer, a profound writer, in his or her own tongue is a great pleasure and gives you a direct access that is deeper than otherwise. So it's not that we have to have, original language access to all the books that we read. And it's not that all of us should have to be conversant in Latin, but several of us should be, so that when we're reading these important books, we're not always dependent on the translation. There's the pleasure component, there's the communal component, there's the ability to have a more accurate and deep understanding. That element's present. And then all of the other benefits that come from studying Latin that are happening simultaneously, even when you're unaware of it. Dorothy Sayers says, when you're studying Latin, you're studying in several subjects simultaneously. You're making progress in other areas, maybe without even realizing it. This is why a great deep study of Latin grammar, say in high school, is to do English grammar. You don't need to do English grammar in junior high and high school if you're studying Latin. You have what you need. To study Latin is already to be studying history. To study Latin is already to come to know who you are, your own linguistic DNA. And it's also to already be studying the Romance languages all at the same time. So I hope that's an encouragement to you. I hope that for some of you who maybe have been on the fence, it will nudge you a bit, propel you to take that next step and look at a Latin book or a Latin course that you might want to study. One last advertisement. You could go to classicalu.com and take a course designed for new Latin adult learners called Essential Latin by Karen Moore. She is the primary author of the Latin Alive series that our company publishes. She's a great teacher, a vivacious Texan who has been teaching Latin for about 20 years. She's really clear and sequential. Take a look at that course, Essential Latin. Maybe that'll be a good way to kind of toe in and see if it isn't something you want to study directly. And then if you're interested for your children, I think you already know what to do. So I'll stop there, and I'd love to get your questions and love to have some conversation with you. So Joe, back to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Pleasure listening to you. And we do have some great questions, so I'll jump right into them. And we'll see if we can get through all of them. We've got, we'll go for about another half an hour here. Again, to everyone who's been listening, who's hung with us, thank you so much. And again, if you need to leave for whatever reason, don't worry. The entire Q&A session will be recorded as well. And at the very end, after Chris navigates some questions, I'm going to screen share on my end and show you some of those links that he was talking about, just so we can make sure you know how to access them. And I have a colleague dropping in some links as well throughout. Make sure you guys check those out in the chat box. So let's move into our questions. Chris, this might be the most robust batch of questions we've gotten yet. We'll start with this one. We'll go a little bit chronologically here. For STEM-oriented students, which we're seeing more and more of, how necessary is it to learn Latin? What is the earliest age and the latest age to learn Latin?
Right. Well, yeah, Latin prepares us for any professional career, and that includes the sciences. Scientia in Latin means knowledge. So a science is a collected body of knowledge ordered and governed by some discrete principles that we humans have discovered, like biology or chemistry. And so everywhere you turn in the sciences, you're finding Latin vocabulary, including in the name science itself. The binomial system of naming plants and animals is all Latin. Whenever we discover a new species, etc., the scientists are trying to figure out what Latin words we'll use to describe this new salamander that we've discovered, say, or fly. Yes, you're just accelerating your ability to process and understand scientific language by knowing Latin. Now, if you know some Greek as well, it will certainly help you in medicine. There are a lot of disease study and features. Epidemiology is based in Greek. So Greek can help you as well in medicine. About 20% of our technical vocabulary comes from Greek, and about another, say, 70, 80% or more sometimes comes from Latin. So, it's so very important for STEM. All the hard sciences are going to have Latin vocabularies. It will only help. And then, as I've already mentioned, the careful way we learn to attend by studying Latin is a habit that is very helpful in scientific study. I mentioned Charles Zubrod, the cancer researcher, who said that very thing. And if you look at all the great original scientists, well, just take Isaac Newton for a moment. He wrote his Principia Mathematica in Latin, and he considered himself a natural philosopher. So it's just science is steeped in Latin. It will only help. When to start? I think, it's never too late. I didn't start studying Latin until I was 18 at the university. I'm glad I studied then. But so studying is, whether you're 8 or 18 or 28 or 38 or 48, it's all fine. But if you're talking about your students, that's the question. I would say be helpful to start in upper elementary school. Doesn't hurt to start in first and second grade if you do it a light using a curriculum like Song School Latin as a supplement, not as a core curriculum. Starting in third or fourth grade, there was a sweet spot for learning grammar. Fourth grade, I would say, is generally the sweet spot. And then just continuing on for like the next 8 years, making that one of your studies. You'll be doing several things at once. And by the time a student's around 10th grade, they'll be reading in Latin and can decide, at least conversantly, decide whether or not they want to continue on to fuller conversancy. And you go on to study in college as well. But, if you do this during your high school years, in college, you'll move right into translation courses, and it'd be easy to pick up, say, a minor or even a classics major as a part of a double major if you've done that. Why not be in, doing do a nursing degree and a classics degree, or a nursing degree and a classics minor degree, and so forth. It'd be a great way to prepare for your future.
Thanks, Chris. We have a few questions about Latin and its correspondence to other languages. One of those is, along with learning Latin, is there a modern language, a particular modern language, such as French, Spanish, Chinese, that you would recommend?
Yeah, and I see especially learning at the same time. Any of the Romance languages that come from Rome, come from Latin. And, I'll just cite for you 5. There's some others, but these are the biggies: Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. Uh, those languages are great to study at the same time you're doing Latin, because the vocabulary, you'll see the vocabulary uh, as a force multiplier, and the grammar you're learning in Latin will just be transferable almost completely to those languages. Um, Now, will there be occasional confusion, with some of the verb endings and so on? Yeah, occasionally, but that's not a problem. And by the way, in Europe, this happens all the time. It just doesn't happen as often in America. If you're Italian, you are learning English, and you're probably learning German and some other language, maybe 3 languages at a time. So that's not a problem. Chinese, Chinese is set up differently, but it still uses the same grammatical principles: subject, object, agreement, and so forth, and adjectives and nouns. So the Latin grammar is still going to help you immensely with the understanding of the grammar of any language. Now, since Chinese is becoming more popular, there's nothing wrong with doing Latin and Chinese, especially if you have Chinese heritage and so forth, and some other reasons to be interested in studying Mandarin. But I would say at first go with the Romance languages because of the 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 the, the sisterly relationship, the genealogical relationship between Latin and any of those Romance languages. Latin and Greek is a good one too. Excuse me. Yeah, Latin. If you do Latin and you want to do some Greek, I know of families that are doing, homeschooling families anyway, doing Latin, Spanish, and Greek. But then if you're going to do that, you have to cut some other things out, right? Or take your time. No need to, you don't want to crush your kids by trying to do too much too soon.
Yeah, Chris, we did have several questions about Greek. One of those was, are there substantially more benefits to learning Latin than Greek? And if you're going to bring Greek into the mix, what would be an ideal age or time to do that? We had Amber just said she has girls that are 8 and 9 years old, thinking about starting some basic Greek, but wondering if it'll be too confusing at that point after doing Latin for 3 years with them. So are there substantially more benefits to learning Latin than Greek, and when would you bring Greek into the mix?
No problem with the confusion side. The grammar of Latin and Greek and the way the noun declensions are set up in Latin and Greek are very, very similar. They both had a parent language called Indo-European that has disappeared. But so there's a relationship. They're cousins, Latin and Greek. Now, of course, different alphabets, but other than that, some interesting similarities. So there's a great degree of reinforcement going from Latin to Greek or Greek to Latin, or doing them both at the same time. Not a problem at all. It was done for centuries. I did it in college, not a problem. So yeah, why do Greek? Well, if you come from a Christian family, that's one reason to consider it, because the New Testament, as you know, was written in Greek. And if you want direct access to the Gospels and letters of Paul in Greek, that's a good reason to know Greek. It's also great for some technical vocabularies like medicine in particular. And it's still the basis of a lot of important words in the English language. Some 20% of polysyllabic words will come from Greek. I mentioned one, history is a Greek word. By the way, when I mentioned the technical vocabularies often come from Latin, 80% or so, by that we also should say synonymously polysyllabic words. If a word has, say, 3 or more syllables, it's probably from Latin. I'm just looking at this one question. I see the word ecumenical. I see the word beneficial. Bene, from the Latin bene, which means well, from bonus, which means good. Official from facio, I make, to make something good or well, beneficial. Ecumenical is Greek, and it's as is dialogue, right? It means to speak through, dia through, logos, a speaking. It's interesting, but I'm also illustrating the X-ray vision that you start to acquire when you know these languages. So Greek is going to help you with technical vocabulary. It's going to help you with the New Testament. If you're of Greek ethnicity, of course, that's another reason for studying Greek. But I think you get a more return, apart from those reasons, you get more return on investment for studying Latin than Greek if you had to choose. Why? Because of the Romance languages that are so popular in the West. Because of the fact that 50% of our English words come from Latin. Because of the fact that 80%, not 20%, of technical vocabularies come from Latin. Those would be reasons why you might want to choose Latin over Greek if you have to choose.
Thanks, Chris. We'll shift a little bit. Joseph Roberts had a question that I want to hear your take on. And he's asking for a Latin Spanish opinion. And I think this is important just because of the emphasis we see on Spanish here in the modern American classroom. Joseph asks, as a Latin teacher who is fluent in Spanish, what benefit is there to study Latin in a classroom instead of Spanish when we are better suited as a culture to bring students to fluency in Spanish, whereas Latin fluency is almost impossible? I wonder if it is easier to do Spanish in lower grades and then teach Latin in high school when students are fluent in 2 languages. Any merit to this approach, or any wisdom you would supply to that angle?
There is merit to that approach, especially if you can teach Spanish really well. The trouble is, if you can acquire fluency or conversancy in Spanish in this cultural moment in the United States, it's practical and helpful and can help you to serve, not just so that you can learn how to order, a great meal at a Spanish-speaking restaurant or something. No, so that you can serve people and have relationships and friendships with people. But the way we teach the modern languages is also a problem because we don't teach grammar, right? And he knows this. Most, if not all, the Spanish curricula are very, very thin on grammar because we haven't taught grammar in English. People don't know grammar. They don't know the difference between subject and object in English. And, can you define what a preposition is, right? We don't know English grammar. And as a result, what about a participle? Can anyone, if I had to ask you all to, in your chat box, define what a participle is, we have not been schooled well in grammar, and that's not our fault, but that's what's happened to us. So what's happening is we have Spanish teachers who are teaching conversational Spanish without teaching much grammar. I'll give you an example of this. If I want to say I like hamburgers in Spanish, well, I use a reflexive form. I use a verb that's in the reflexive form, me gusta hamburguesas, which literally means hamburgers please me. And if I put it in that word order, me gustas hamburguesas, I'm saying me pleases hamburgers. We never use that word order in English, would we? If I want to say I love hamburgers, I would say yo amo hamburguesas. Well, it's because amo is in this indicative active mood. It's not reflexive. So you can see the confusion. If we don't learn the difference, then what do we have when we're teaching Spanish? Well, we have people saying things like, yo gustas hamburguesas. They want to use the subjective case yo rather than the accusative or objective case me, and they don't know because they haven't learned the difference. They haven't learned those grammatical distinctions. It gets all garbled, and so the only way that we can teach Spanish is to keep repeating. It's 3 o'clock. Keep repeating the correct ways of doing it without teaching them the principle that would help them to know what was correct in the first place on their own. Well, so that's just one problem, and I'm you can tell I'm off on a little soapbox and a tangent. We don't teach modern languages very well, so it's not frequent to the point of the questioner that we're actually learning, that we're getting anybody near fluency in Spanish by the time they graduate from 12th grade. That just doesn't happen very often. I hope it happens with this teacher. But you can't really do it really well with the curriculum we're using and the methods we're using and doing it 3 days a week for 3 or 4 years. How many of you have had Spanish for 4 or 5 years? You just put a Y in the chat box. If you've studied Spanish for 3 or 4 years in high school, but wouldn't dare want to have a conversation with anybody right now about in Spanish because you'd embarrass yourself. That's just so common because of how poorly we've been trained in language generally. That's a tangent. Latin is either sequence can be great. I don't really have a strong preference. I would argue for learning the mother first. Learn Latin, which is the mother of Spanish, first, because it's easier to go from Latin to Spanish or French or Italian or Portuguese than it is to go from Spanish back to Latin or laterally across. So if you want to be not just bilingual, but have a chance of being polylingual, and I don't just mean speaking, but reading, it's better to start with Latin. But it's not much better. I know we have to make decisions about how we use our time, but I would be delighted to have anybody do a serious study of both Spanish and Latin in any sequence.
I think regardless of whether that was a tangent or not, I think it was an important tangent. So thank you for going that direction, Chris. We have a couple questions on teaching methodologies, particularly the natural method versus the grammar translation method. Can you talk about the benefits of teaching both methodologies and maybe a light pros and cons as well?
Yeah, by natural method, I'm sure the questioner means teaching Latin in Latin as much as possible, sometimes called direct method, immersive method, active Latin, spoken or oral Latin. I think it's great to do that as you are able when you can. If you have a teacher who's been trained and equipped and able to do that, it's great. Just keep in mind you need time to do this well. The grammar translation, and it's really not, in my view, an either or question. It's a both and. Even teachers who, like me, have been trained mainly in grammar translation method and don't speak orally very well, will use oral Latin. Solvete omnes, we'll use phrases, and it's good to do that and to do as much as we can, given the pedagogical situation and our training and the training our students have. But to do active Latin or natural method Latin instruction requires a good degree of training and immersive experience on the part of the teacher to do it well. I'll cite my son as an example. He's a much better Latin speaker than I am. He's been to Italy in an immersive academy for probably 18 months, where all he did was speak Latin. He wasn't allowed to speak English or anything else. So he got pretty good at speaking Latin. So he's equipped to do this well in class. But to try to do that when you haven't had that training yourself will be challenging, so as a Latin teacher. But you can do elements of it. Another observation is this: when people say, well, I want to teach language like the way we learned English, immersively, so we should be teaching Latin in Latin. Well, just be careful about using the word immersive, because immersive means, from head to toe, you're in that language. When my son Noah went to Italy, he was immersed in Latin for 18 months. When you do it 3 days a week or 4 days a week for 45 minutes, that's not immersion. And so you can't make the kind of progress that you would make if every moment you were using language, it was in Latin with a Latin speaker who was advanced over you, correcting you at every moment like you learned English. That was your mom and dad. That was immersion. So to say that, well, I'm using that same method teaching Latin and isn't that best because that's the way I was, that's the way I was, that's the way we all learned English, is not a clean analogy, because you need a coach with you very regularly to make progress learning that way. Having said that, I think we should incorporate as much Latin speaking as we can. And I do think there are some advantages to, just spending more time in the text in Latin and not always focusing on grammar and translation at every moment when we're encountering Latin composition or sentences. There's a place for reading through a passage and trying to understand it without trying to break everything down grammatically every attempt you get to a sentence. So these kind of instructional methods, these pedagogies really should exist on a continuum. And even somebody trained in grammar translation should be using natural method as much as possible when it seems wise. And then anybody who's trained in natural method, like my son, will still stop and do grammar translation. So in other words, I don't think we're purists on either on one side or the other of that equation. I like natural method, and our own company is leaning into it and hoping to help accelerate more natural method instruction in the years to come. But it's a slower process to acquire that kind of training because it involves significant amount of time to be trained that way.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. I'll move on to parents, teachers, educators seeking help for their own sake, not the sake of their child. We have two questions here. One is, I never studied Latin and want my child to learn Latin. I'm homeschooling. Is it possible for me to learn Latin and teach Latin in the same time, or is it too daunting? Should I hire someone to teach my child Latin? And for that, I think it was a good point for me to interject and say that we do have an online school, and that online school not only offers Latin courses for middle and upper school students in Latin, even as young as 5th grade, but there's also tutoring services through that school. The school's name is Schola Academy, and we'll share some links to that. So if there are questions in the back of your head, because Classical Academic Press offer any tutoring services for my child, or for me, because we have had adults use those tutoring services as well, or can I have them take a course taught by seasoned Latin instructors? The answer is yes, and we'll include a link to Schola Academy, make sure you have that. But back to the question, is it possible for adults to learn and teach Latin at the same time? Your thoughts on that, Chris?
Thank you for that question. I think the answer is yes, it is definitely possible. It's happening all the time. In fact, there are a number of teachers coming into classical schools teaching Latin who are homeschooling educators who have learned Latin, teaching their children Latin over, say, 5 or 10 years, and have learned the language sufficiently to teach it at the junior high and high school level at a school, and certainly in co-ops, homeschooling co-ops. So it can be done. You read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, you'll read about how he taught himself French. It's kind of interesting. People have been teaching themselves languages for a long time, and now we have resources that Franklin didn't have, like Joe's just mentioned. Online courses, great textbooks from a variety of publishers, tutoring that you can do online and so forth. It's amazing. Apps and so forth, great dictionaries. So yes, you can. You certainly can. And if you're a younger mom with younger kids, or a father, I don't know if we have a mother or a father here, probably a mom, you'll be able to take the course right along with them at the children's level. And that's one of the beauties of learning with children, is that you can study with a text that's designed, say, for a 4th or a 5th or a 6th grader or a junior high or high schooler. You should be fine. it's just a matter of being able to allocate the time to do so. And I think as a homeschooling parent, we're trying to get to some degree the education we didn't get, right? You might be fine teaching them literature or history or basic science or mathematics, but if you haven't had Latin, you feel that as a gap, might be something very much worth studying along with your kids at keeping up with them over the years. But I would encourage you to pace yourself. A language is like a culture. Language is not learned easily in a crash course. For it to stick, we have to use it over time. It's very similar to mathematics. So using, staying with the language daily is much better to do 20 minutes 5 days a week for the next 5 years than to kind of episodically binge on Latin. Just start and pace yourself and keep at it, and you will grow good at it. And then there will be opportunities for you to go to conferences, meet other Latin teachers online, maybe end up taking a course at a local college. All of those opportunities are likely to open up for you. So I would say do it. Use the resources that are already very convenient at hand, and stay with it. Put yourself on a 5-year plan.
Thanks, Chris. Good question here from Tammy that I think we absolutely need to touch on, and it's just basically talking about student appreciation for the subject of Latin. It's one thing for a student to just commit to Latin, to study Latin. It's a whole nother thing for that student to develop an appreciation for Latin. Tammy asks, do you have any tips to help students who do not yet appreciate their Latin studies develop some level of appreciation for it?
It is a challenge, especially when we're trying to give Latin to our students if we haven't also received it. If you love, Jane Austen, say, and Jane Austen, then it's not going to be that hard for you to impart that love and taste and affection for Jane Austen yourself, right? You got a better chance of doing it with your kids. Tend to often love the things you love. Well, so you have to learn to love Latin yourself. So the one question I would ask is, do you know Latin sufficiently to love it? You might think of it as good medicine. You might think of it as good job preparation or preparation for life and other things, but it would be helpful for you to start learning enough Latin that you get it, that you see its value, and that you've personally experienced its blessing and benefit, so that it kind of lives in you, even to a small degree, because now you're modeling becoming more human. You're modeling a kind of enthusiasm and excitement and illumination that your kids will more likely catch. And so some degree that enthusiasm is caught rather than it's taught. And if that's not you yet, you can be honest about that. I wish I could be that. I want to love it more than I can, but I don't know how to yet. I'm frustrated. Well, I understand that, but you step in yourself. You have the same responsibility to do this that your kids do, or that you want your kids to have. But if that's a challenge, bring in someone who already shines with enthusiasm and love for Latin and can embody a great case for it, right? And that may be one reason you're on this webinar, because you want your own love for it to be cultivated and to grow. So you're doing the right thing. But can you bring someone into your family? Can you find someone who knows and loves Latin, who can spread its cheer and enthusiasm in a personal way? Can you do that online? With our online course, I teach on the videos for Latin for children. I'm trying to do that. You'll have to assess how well I do it, but I'm trying to help ignite a fire underneath these kids and in their hearts, so that they would love this language. And how do we do that? Well, we show them how Latin blesses them. We model the blessing and benefit that it's been to us, right? Like, small example would be me talking about exit over the doors. I share that often with kids because I'm trying to open their eyes to the beauty that Latin is. I'm trying to get them to imagine what it would be like to have this superpower of Latin X-ray vision. I want them to try to think of Latin as a code that they have to crack in order to discover the secret meaning that resides under these Latin words. And for a lot of these kids, they lean into that and they love it, they want it, and it starts to grow in them. And then they study the language out of love. Um, Now, a stage of life has something to do with this, does it not? So with a 5-year-old, have you noticed this? 5-year-olds are different than 15-year-olds when it comes to being at wonder in the world. A 5-year-old is at wonder in the world. And so you're there, that 5-year-old is generally ready to be introduced to all kinds of exciting things that she expects exist in this mysterious world of which you are a curator and a more mature a mentor in, right? That's just the way it is with younger kids. But when it's 15 years old and a little jaded and watched a little too many reruns of The Office on Netflix, and then you're coming to that 15-year-old and saying, hey, how about we study Latin? You've got a different human being in front of you. So no doubt part of this has to do with the way your child's already been formed, stage of life, cultural concerns, and so on. So I know that that's complex, and I don't want to try to be reductive, but we do need to do whatever we can to help them to see the beauty and the goodness and the truth that is in an art like Latin or any other art. I'll just say one more thing and I'll shut up on this topic. But one way to do it is to leverage, to pull those strings that you see in the heart of your son or daughter that represent the good things they do love, right? So if they love reruns of The Office as kind of their primary thing, you got a problem in the formation of the soul of that child. But if your daughter loves art and loves drawing and loves architecture, that's a good thing. Loves painting. You can relate Latin to that love because Latin is the linguistic DNA of the West. So it's going to be related to any of those things that she loves that is good. And then it's your job to see what that connection is between Latin and art history, Latin and architecture. And all of those things do exist. And if you don't know what they are, I won't go through that right now, but there is some dynamic relationships between Latin and art and Latin and architecture and Latin and drawing, say. Just Vitruvius, the great architect, Roman architect, says you have to know all the liberal arts well in order to be a good architect. You can read his little essay online, but you can find that out. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Chris. I'll do one more question. I think this is an appropriate one to end with, because we're going beyond Latin with this question. And then as promised, I'll move into a brief time of screen sharing. We're already at the 75-minute mark, so we'll wrap up here in a little bit. Let you guys get on with your Friday. Before I ask Chris this question, there's one very, very important thing I want to mention, and that is simply the fact that we haven't gotten to all your questions. That does tend to happen. I think we broke some records for most questions asked in a webinar today, which is exciting to me, because you're all hungry, and we like that because, in a sense, we like feeding you. And then today there's a lot of plates at the table, so we want to make sure that you don't go unfed, so to speak. And simply the best way for us to do that is to provide you with an email address. And if I did not address your question today, that doesn't mean it was a bad question. We simply didn't have the time, and we would like to address it. So you can email your question to info@classicalsubjects.com. I'm just going to drop that address right here in the chat box. You can also find it on our website, as well as a phone number to reach Classical Academic Press. But we like to handle specific inquiries, and there were a lot of very specific questions today through that email address. So info@classicalsubjects.com. And that's there for you in the chat box. And I'll mention that one more time before we wrap up too, because it is important. We want to make sure your questions are addressed. So here we go, Chris. Are you ready? The final question. Spiritually, holistically, what is the benefit of studying Latin? The specific question was, how would studying Latin benefit Christians in the 21st century, the midst of the culture we're in? But I even take that a step further and saying just spiritually, what can we gain from studying Latin?
Okay, it's a great question. for the Christians on the call. Uh, First of all, it is Latin, as I've already mentioned, will involve you in this virtue or discipline of attending. It will teach you to pay attention. And Simone Weil says some wonderful things. Christian writer says that attention is related to prayer, and that attending carefully to something that is true, good, and beautiful already is bringing us into prayer, where we're starting to engage the creator who is the author and source of all that's true, good, and beautiful. So just that act of using the mind that God has given you to attend to something that is in a foreign language that's true, good, and beautiful is a spiritual discipline. Now, of course, I'm assuming here that the text that you're reading would be edifying. And there are so many edifying texts in the Latin language for which a direct access in Latin is a blessing, that you could call that a spiritual benefit. And I cited Augustine already, and I'll just use him again as my working example, but there are many, many other authors, in the history of the church who have written in Latin, whom we can access directly to our great edification and blessing. The same by analogy, the same reason you might want to learn Greek in order to access the scriptures in the original tongue is the same reason that you would want to know Latin in order to access Augustine's thought in his tongue. Um, Not only that, but if you're interested in growing as a Christian, all of the theological vocabulary virtually exists in Latin. There's Greek phrases as well, like hamartology, the study of sin, and so forth. But all of the theological encyclopedia and vocabulary is Latinate and Greek, but largely Latinate. So knowing Latin is going to help you to grow theologically as well, just in terms of acquiring a good understanding of the vocabulary. I'll give you one example. Eschatology is a Greek word, but if you've known what the millennium is, and you want to know whether you should be in terms of eschatology, eschaton means the end of things. Eschaton means end and final resolution, but millennium means 1,000 years. Mille means 1,000 in Latin. So the millennium is, what do we understand Revelation chapter 20 to mean when it says that there's a 1,000 millennial reign of Christ? And there's three basic millennial positions: premillennial, postmillennial, and amillennial, in terms of, does Christ return before the millennium begins, or is he now reigning in the millennium right now? Is this the 1,000-year reign of Christ since Christ ascended to heaven? Or will the millennium will he only come after the millennium is been completed? There's these various, just to illustrate the way theology is so informed by Latin as well as Greek. But I would say we need to slow down and to learn to contemplate spiritual truths. This will be my final comment. We need to contemplate. We rush. We are frenetic. We don't stop. We are like Teflon spiritually. We hear a sermon, we read something, it just slides right off of us. We forget it. It doesn't become a part of us. It doesn't stick because we don't know how to attend. But if you read the confessions in Latin slowly, or you read your Vulgate slowly in Latin, you will find yourself reading meditatively, contemplatively, attentively, and slowly. And I would contend that the lessons and the teaching there will stay with you, much more likely stay with you, because of the slow, careful reading that reading in Latin requires. So yeah, it will bless you spiritually, especially if you're reading the great church fathers and Christian writers in their original tongue of Latin.
Thanks, Chris, for that thorough answer. Again, everyone, thanks. Those of you who have remained through the Q&A, thanks for sticking around. If you're watching the recording, we appreciate and love you too. Thanks, whether it's in the year 2021 or perhaps this is the year 2031 and you are watching this recording, because Latin will still be around in the year 2031, believe it or not.
Hello,
isn't that right, Chris? Very quickly, for those who are invested for the third level of our presentation today. Here it is. I'm going to screen share with you all very, very quickly and blaze through a couple of resources, make sure that you guys are all set up. I'm going to start with our homepage, classicalacademicpress.com. You should all be able to see it here. If you're new to our site, if you're just learning to navigate our site, I would say the main thing you need to familiarize yourself is this black bar here and where it leads you. First thing, classical curriculum, that's where we're at right here. You see back to the homepage, classical curriculum. Under resources, if you go to product lines, you'll see that our 3 Latin lines are right at the top here. Latin for children, grades 4 through 7, Song School Latin, grades 1 through 3, Latin Alive, grades 7 through 12. I'll choose Latin for Children, the Latin for Children A program, just to show you what on the product page, what to look for. First of all, for anyone joining us from a school today, hybrid or traditional model, we encourage you, if you're interested in any of our Latin books, to request an evaluation copy. Click that button right there, and you'll be sent to a form through which you can request evaluation copies of our Latin books or any of our curriculum. But further down here on the product page, and you'll see this on any of our Latin product pages, but I'm just highlighting it here for Latin for Children, really hone in on the support tab right here. The support tab includes all of our additional resources, free resources for the curricula, whether it's Latin for Children, Song School Latin, Latin Alive, or curricula outside of the scope of Latin. This support tab is able to resolve a lot of issues and provide a lot of extra and supplemental resources for you and your students. As you can see, we have a number for Latin for Children. I won't take the time to go through many of them. I will highlight the How to Teach Latin PDF, suggested weekly schedule are at the top for a reason. So knowing where those resources are very important. I like to show that for all webinars, that is the support tab on our product pages. I'll head back to the main page here. This was mentioned earlier, School Academy online courses. This will take you to the School Academy page. You go to all sources, you'll see the Latin options for lower school, Latin for Children A through C. For middle school, Latin 1 and 2, which is used teaching our Latin Alive book. And then for upper school, we have spoken Latin courses, Latin 1, 2, and 3 using Latin Alive, as well as intermediate and advanced Latin through School Academy, all taught, like I mentioned, by veteran Latin instructors. And then as well here through School Academy, you can access the tutoring center for Latin tutoring. And then finally, Classical U. This was also mentioned briefly, but the Essential Latin course, we had a few questions on seminars, Latin teaching seminars and accreditation. We don't offer anything specifically for Latin, but our Classical U course, Essential Latin, is probably the closest thing that we do offer in addition to previous webinars, as I mentioned, in terms of getting that teacher training. So on Classical U, we have a new feature called our Course Finder, kind of a hub for all of our Classical U teacher training courses, including our Latin course right here. You'll see Essential Latin and a number of other courses as well. So that is Classical U, great resource there. And finally, this link was shared before, I'll share it again. This is our webinar playlist with all previous webinars from this year and beyond. You'll see some great ones from Chris here, helping our children to be seekers and finders. Excellent webinar, as well as get to know lower school Latin. And then there were webinars from a teacher training conference that we did before that are accessible here as well as an upper school Latin webinar with Latin Alive author Karen Moore. That was a little bit of a rush there. And I hope that you were able to glean something from that. From a resource standpoint, thank you to Alex for dropping those links in for everyone. And Chris has vanished. I suspect he can still hear me. There he is. Chris, any final words from you as we head into the weekend?
Oh, I want to say thank you to the many teachers on the call, homeschooling educators, school educators. Your work is something we admire greatly, and we are so honored to be partners with you. And I would just say regarding Latin, stay with it and think of this as learning a new culture. Uh, Pace yourself, be patient with yourself. Festina lente, make haste slowly. Put yourself on at least a 5-year plan and do a little bit regularly. Try to do 4 or 5 days a week, 20 to 30 minutes, and you will be a different person. Thanks. Thanks for being with me.
Thanks for those closing thoughts, Chris. And one last time, I'll mention info@classicalsubjects.com, the email address that you want to contact if any remaining questions you have, even if you think of one after the fact. And to those who asked a great question that I didn't get to today, sorry, thank you for asking your questions. And we look forward to hopefully addressing that over email. And it's info@classicalsubjects.com. As Chris said, be blessed. We are so overwhelmed at times by the amount of support, the ongoing conversation that we have through these webinars. We look forward to continue offering more webinars here in the weeks ahead. We have a few more lined up before the end of the summer, a science webinar with John Mays and a writing webinar in August. And then we're planning some special webinars in the end of August and then on through the fall as well, including some with authors of a few of our books. So look for the recording. It'll be sent to your email as long as some helpful links to resources. We'll have that to you within the next week. Have a great weekend, everyone. Be blessed, and thank you so much for joining us today. Take care.